I want you to meet Vernon Geberth if you haven't heard about him already. He's a retired NYPD lieutenant commander who has investigated, supervised, or consulted on 8,000 homicide investigations during his career. I figured there was no one better to speak to get advice on my ongoing investigation into the deaths of John and Joyce Sheridan, which are still shrouded in mystery over a year after officials declared it a murder-suicide. Vernon literally wrote the book on investigating death cases. It's called Practical Homicide Investigation. It's a textbook that has been used by police departments worldwide.
You do it right the first time, you only get one chance. That's the principle of practical homicide investigation.
So I headed out to State College, PA, where Vernon was headlining a 5-day course teaching the Pennsylvania Homicide Investigators Association. Something that intrigued me was part of practical homicide investigation called the 7 mistakes of suicide investigations.
Treat every death investigation like a homicide and you won't have a problem. Those 7 mistakes that I list are the most common mistakes made by law enforcement and medical people across the world.
Now, I've been trying to find out the truth behind the death of John Sheridan, a former state transportation commissioner and ally of Governor Chris Christie, who authorities say stabbed his wife to death, lit his Montgomery house on fire, and slashed himself in the neck. I wondered if perhaps the Montgomery cops and the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office had fallen into one of the traps that Vernon mentions in his book, which he calls assuming the suicide position.
Oh, it's suicide, no big deal, and they cut corners. Now, when you cut corners in a death investigation, you set yourself up for a bad day.
Yeah.
Because if somebody like me comes in and examines what you did, I'm going to say the investigation was insufficient. Now you're stuck.
Vernon told me about an investigation in the South Bronx from years ago where he arrived at a construction site where a man had apparently hung himself and found patrol officers going through the man's pockets, assuming that it was a suicide.
Does that look normal to you, the way he's hanging? How many people hang themselves with a thing smacking them in the head? And
Right.
wouldn't it be easy to hang the other way? I said, and by the way, did you notice there's a piece of vegetation in the back of his hair? Do you see any vegetation at the crime scene?
Right, how did that get there?
No, sir. I said, that's because he was transported here and strung up to make it look like a suicide.
Finally, I asked Vernon for any advice that he could give me on my examination of the Sheridan case, and he pointed out a mistake that I had made.
You just heard me mention victimology.
Right.
That's the most important factor in an investigation. What was going on in their lives at the time of the event? And that's when motives and tensions and suspects come to the surface. You find out someone who had long-term plans and short-term plans, and you're calling them a suicide? Nah, no good.
Of course. I was so caught up in the evidence, the crime scene, that I didn't think about the key question. Who was John Sheridan? And that's a story that I'm going to be bringing to you very soon on Chasing News.